Hey folks, it's Chris with the Human Project. What I'm really excited for this episode is we're building on top of what we talked about in the last episode, which was imposter syndrome. This time we go even deeper to talking about what does the imposter syndrome and what does a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset reveal about identity? And ultimately, what do we do with identity? What is our identity founded on? And what is the thing that can save us and rescue us from that? Hint, it's the gospel. Take a listen to this episode. Let us know what you think. Hi, Mark.
Hi, Chris.
How's it going today?
It's really good. It's really good. It's wonderful. It's a little chilly, but it's good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm a bit cold. But yeah,
It's keeping us awake. We're alert.
It's all good. Derek's here in shorts.
Go figure.
In December.
What in the world?
So,
Dude, I don't get it.
He totally appreciates us. I'm calling him out like that too. He gave the big old hand up like, what? What are you doing?
That's how much we like you.
Yeah. You are part of this, Derek. We are here to involve you. Don't cut any of this out.
You have the power to do that, but don't do it.
So, on a more serious note, the last episode, we dove into imposter syndrome, talking about what does that look like tactically, and gave 4 R's on how to combat imposter syndrome tactically. But I wanted to shift because it's a great starting point, and you hinted at this a little bit, of connection and community as a way to help go beyond imposter syndrome. But I want to dive deeper into what imposter syndrome reveals.
Yeah.
Because often there's this belief system that's in place. And typically we're calling it out like, I need to prove myself. That's the surface level.
Yeah.
And there's even deeper seated beliefs below that I think are helpful to call out. So when I talk about belief, what comes to mind for you when you hear like the word belief?
I think a lot of us would probably use the word thought or thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And it's more like a deep thought to me. It's not a passing thought, but something that I think repeatedly, or that I think is true. If I put it like that, that's actually belief language right there. So if I believe that something's true, that's how I'm going to think about it, and the perspective I'm going to take. Like, I have to prove myself in this. I must show that I'm capable, or I can't. Now we're starting to get into really strong beliefs that we might even term as like vows. I have to do this, or I can't do that.
Yeah, we've talked about this before with the intentionality of language. But it's probably good bringing that up just a little bit here of like what we mean when we say I have to or I can't.
Yeah.
Like, that's not often what we actually mean.
Right. And just to kind of draw the thread through imposter syndrome to that language, like when we start to see ourselves or have gone into imposter syndrome, unraveling that, unwinding that, backing the bus up a little bit, what is it that we're thinking about? If we can slow that down, go back to those thoughts, we will usually find some of those words that we talked about in that episode of the intentionality of language. I must, I have to, I always, never, can't.
Yeah.
Would be another really strong one that I find myself saying in the midst of an imposter syndrome moment. And that can reveal something. If I'm looking at it this way, it can really reveal what's going on deeper inside of my thoughts and my heart at that moment.
Yeah, you used the analogy of a snowball last episode, talk about what happens before that snowball gets rolling.
Yeah.
And this is more when that snowball is actually rolling, when it's accumulating a lot and it's talking about something that's really deeply seated beyond just people are going to think I don't know what I'm doing or that. And we talked about how to pause and reflect on that, recenter. This is one that is almost always worth the cost of pausing when something's happening, going back, if you don't have the opportunity to pause, going back and thinking about it.
Yeah.
And saying, what did I actually believe and what's underneath that? What's that big thought that I have about the situation that caused either me to feel the imposter syndrome, me think that I'm not good enough, given we talked about where they're at is potentially a deficiency.
Right.
It's like something you want to work on or a skill you need to build. And at the end of our last episode, you hinted on connection. So I want to talk about that as a lead in for what do we do with these beliefs?
Mm-hmm.
And then what's that mindset that it reveals for us?
I'm just going to key off of one of the things you said earlier. What we discover is people are usually not, or hardly ever, are they as focused on us, what we're doing, our mistakes, whatever it might be, as we think they are. And so I would say outside perspective.
Yeah.
Set it up ahead of time if you can, get it afterward if you can. And that's kind of the trick that I was telling you. If I can refocus myself, for example, on the person who's asking me a question in class, and then afterward I can reflect, how did they respond to that? That I don't even have to directly ask them, hey, I was doubting myself in that moment.
Yeah.
I don't know why I picked up a Jersey accent. That question, hey, I was doubting myself. But like, what was the impact of that? That person actually reflected that it was helpful to them, and that helped them figure out the next thing that they were going to do. Maybe I don't need to have all the answers, or be explicit about it. Ask a buddy or a friend or a coworker or something. Hey, in this, how do you think that went? What did you see that I need to work on? And whether it's I didn't notice anything, or yeah, you can work on this probably. It can help clarify, narrow the focus. I think that's a good practice also to take after the fact, or it's not the end of the world. Yeah, no, that probably wasn't the best that you can do, or that there might have been a better way, but we'll notice that nobody perished, as I like to say, and good came out of it, or what's the next thing that we want to do about it. So getting outside of our heads, that's a really important aspect of community. How do we partner with other people so that we're doing that with them and they're doing that with us, so we can see the outside perspective and not just all that messy thought in our head. That usually, trying to look at it through someone else's eyes can help us see our beliefs that are coming through. Actually, it can kind of put that in stark contrast. You put someone else's glasses on, you're like, whoa, oh, I see. That's how I'm looking at this situation.
Yeah.
So that's super valuable, really critical. Have you seen that in your, like you were using the example last time of a new job? And was there, situations like that where you found community to be really helpful?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Yeah, I was, we had moved several people in the organization from their old roles to this new role. And I was one of 6 people to go through that. So we operated like a community. We were like, what is this thing? What are we doing here?
Taking the journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was really good to see. One of my coworkers, Teresa, she and I would talk every single day. And she was just very open and vulnerable. And it was great to hear. But we'd give each other feedback because we were operating within the same area of the organization. And so it was really helpful to see. And I also had a really great manager named Kevin that I was not shy to ask questions. In fact, I always think I'm the person that asks the most questions.
Okay.
Until I met you.
You're welcome.
And he was just really helpful and pointing in, give me good feedback, gave me opportunities to improve. And that was really helpful. Because I think a same root issue, but approaching it from a different stance, instead of the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us come from the mindset of deficiency.
Yeah.
We won't even try something because we don't think we're capable. Or we say, I am not the kind of person that does that. It becomes more identity level.
Okay.
So both of them, I think, have the same root cause, but they approach one of, I try it, but I'm afraid and don't want to be a fraud. And the other is, I don't try it because I know that I cannot do it. And sometimes that's healthy. But when it becomes a piece of, I'm not going to try this and I don't want to gain the skills and it would be helpful for me, that's when it becomes a challenge, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But all of them rest on these deeply held thoughts and beliefs outside of community.
Right. Where they can be challenged, where we can look at them in different viewpoints.
Yeah.
So I'm hearing some connection there with language that we're using that might reveal when we are down in these really deeply held beliefs. Instead of I'm struggling with, right? That's kind of outside of myself, the way I'm referring to that. I'm struggling with, or I didn't do that as well as I think I might have, or I'm not sure how to do this. Those are all outside of me. In a sense, those are things that I'm doing, as opposed to I'm not good at this. That's I am is literally in that sentence. That's right there. Right. I am not good at this means that's about who I am.
Yeah.
I'm kind of swallowing that deeper than just I'm struggling with it, or I don't know how to do this very well right now. I am not good at this, or I will never be good at this. It's an even stronger, like drive that nail deeper.
Yeah.
And those are the things that push that snowball downhill into an avalanche, if that's what's driving our imposter syndrome.
Right? Yeah. It's really easy to do that when it is that extreme, because then it becomes, instead of this little task that you want to do, it's I got to do a complete overhaul.
Right. This is so much easier to see outside of yourself. It's so much easier to see in somebody else, where you're like, all you need to do is write this email. Like, you kind of go like, what's the big deal? Why is this such a big deal? Just write the email, you know? But to the person who's going through it, when I'm the one trying to write the email, I'm like, oh my gosh, the world's about to end. Because, you know, that's what it feels like, because it's got all this oomph behind it.
Weight.
Yeah. And then again, just that's why community is so good, because someone outside of your head can go like, well, I'm curious, why is this so important to you? Why is this a crisis to write the email? It seems like that's really driving something very big for you, and it can kind of help you go like, what is going on here?
Yeah. Big surprise that things that we talk about come back to community and connection. We have an entire series on community and connection, so we won't rehash all of that here, but just to say, man, it is worth it. And this is another prime example of that, because if you're doing this alone and you don't have anybody to help guide you, it's really, really difficult. So get plugged into a community.
Yeah.
Start listening, start modeling it, build that connection as it goes. We have classes on that.
Also
creating connection on how to listen effectively. Yeah. So you can check that out on our website.
And you don't have to do any of them perfectly.
Right. But I digress from the pitch. But I believe in the pitch because it's really impactful. Going back to beliefs, I think there's this popular term. It was popular maybe 8 years ago or so, and I haven't heard it much since then. But this idea of a growth mindset instead of a fixed mindset. Whereas a fixed mindset becomes, I am this and it will forever be this way always.
Yeah.
And a growth mindset is currently, this is how I exhibit a trait or a character or something like that. And one is saying, the fixed is saying, I'm always going to stay here. The growth is saying, here's where I'm at now, and acknowledging reality. And I think that is one that really provides life to beliefs, either, and I use that term very intentionally, either in a good way or a bad way.
Yeah.
It's either fueling thorns or fueling flowers. And I'm curious, when you hear those terms, growth mindset or fixed mindset, what else would you add on top of?
What came to mind for me is I'm remembering when we were learning Spanish. So word nerd alert, big time.
Hola.
Hola, ¿cómo estás? Me llamo Marcos.
¿Dónde está el baño?
That away. But when we were learning Spanish, you learn a lot about your own language in learning another language.
English is annoying.
It is crazy, man. It is. I'm sorry for anybody who has to learn English as a second or third or fourth language. I'm so sorry.
And respect.
Yes, also true. But there are at least two verbs for to be in Spanish. And one of them is a transient, as the fancy word for saying temporary state. And one of them is like a permanent, it's an identity state, would be another way of saying it. So you've got two different verbs for that, and you use them intentionally. Like, I'm cold. We just have I am cold. And it's like, actually, I'm just temporarily cold, dude. Or if you say the permanent one, it's like, I'm cold. Like, that's a very different meaning.
Only to be used by snowmen.
All the way through deep. I'm just cold. I'm a cold person. It would be my maybe how we would say that in English.
Wow. Okay. I did not learn that in Spanish for the 4 years that I did it.
Ser and estar, my friend.
Those
are the two verbs.
Okay.
But it helped me realize that we don't have a difference in the verbs that we use. Even to say I am hungry that's not an identity statement, right? It's, I have hunger would be how you'd say that in Spanish also. It's a different verb, but it's the same kind of concept.
I know that one. Yo tiene hambre.
Yeah, I have hunger.
See, I'm good. If I ever go to Mexico, I am great.
Conjugated the verb, but that's okay. It's all right,
darn.
man. You got the right verb.
I will find food and I will find the bathroom. I'm set. Priorities.
Everything else, who knows what's going to happen. But it calls that out to me, that there are temporary states,
Hmm.
and then there are like identity things. And if I'm treating one like the other, and typically it'd be a temporary state that I'm treating like a permanent state, that's where it gets dangerous to me. And to me, that's like a growth mindset in a way. Like I can either say I am no good at math, which, by the way, I do struggle at math. I'm trying to be very careful with my language here.
Yeah.
But the reality is that for my life, that is something that has not been easy for me. But it also doesn't have to be an identity statement, which is how I often say it. Like, I stink at math. I'm bad at math. I will never be good at math, and escalate it like that. It doesn't have to be that way. I can learn some things that help me in the tasks where I need to use math. So that's more of a growth mindset. How can I focus on what I need to know in order to help me in the spots where math is going to be useful for me? Very practical example, maybe, but that's how it shows up for me.
Yeah. No, that's good. I'm curious, like, how much stuff in our life is actually fixed? Like,
wow,
there are some traits in our life that are fixed, but as far as identity goes, there's very few things, at least that I can think of right now, that are fixed. Like,
sure.
One is like, as a believer, like, yeah, I'm fixed. I'm there. God has got me. Like, cool. Other things, I'm like, I like to be funny. I like to enjoy life. I am good at math.
Yeah. Yes, you are.
But it's like other things are, transient is a great word for it. Like, that's so much like now in my current state of being. And a lot of that's transitioned. Like, a lot of changes happened over the last couple of years for me. Just being a father, just as one example. Like, there's so much of things that I valued before that I don't value as much now, and things that I didn't value before that I do value now.
Yeah.
And maybe that is, it's interesting that I went from identity to value.
There's something there.
I'm curious. Community, help me in perspective. What other things could be identity that are fixed, that aren't transient?
I'll give a principled answer because that's how I think. Cool. Shockingly, I'm going to go to principle.
Love it.
I think it's what God made us for. What is it that God made us for? And there's some transient. Look, let's also be really clear here. When we say transient, that's over a period of time, or else this doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah. Which
so
we are all transient.
Right. So if you zoom way out, we are transient.
500 million thousand foot view.
Right. So it just
Which
depends on
500 billion.
How far in you're zooming, I guess, as to how transient something is. But for a person's lifetime, I'm going to say there are some things, and this is, like I said, a very principled answer, non-specific, but I'm trying to shift the question. What has God given us that is our identity? That is intended to be non-transient. And the trick to me, not trick, but the perspective, there we go. The perspective for me is to look at, even if I'm not seeing it or walking it out, that is still true about me, period, like non-transient.
Yeah, I don't know how I didn't make this connection before, but that's a great way of thinking about it, because that's why the Human Project exists.
Yeah.
Like, what was God's original design, and how do we transition ourselves back to that?
Yeah.
How do we learn and move and grow and close that gap back to what God designed for us as human beings?
Align ourselves to what his intent was, and for us specifically individually, what he designed us for, like what's just true about us.
Yeah. So going back to the imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
Let's tie our way back to that, because we went off.
Yes.
But I think this is still very much rooted in the imposter syndrome that we have, because for us, when we try and, what's the phrase? Lean out over our skis. Is that the phrase?
Yeah, I've never skied, but that sounds about right.
Me either, because
you lose your balance and go forward. That sounds like pretty bad.
That sounds like every day for me. But like, go out over your skis. I think there's some of that if we try and prove ourselves too much, that's not healthy. That's not what God designed us for. And there's a healthy part of it of when we're trying to do something and we can admit that we're trying to do something.
Yeah.
So experimentation comes back into this too. To go from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, experimentation is giant part of it. Here's something I want to try. Here's something I admit that I'm currently not good at, but I would like to get better at. And here's my step forward.
You're setting yourself up in that. So to have an experiment, you're dealing with this heading into a situation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's just say like, I'm intentionally trying to learn this, to explore this, to see how this might happen and what I might learn in those types of things. And that's really powerful to shift your brain's perspective, thinking stance, walking into a situation.
Yeah. And tying it back to what I mentioned with the purpose-driven life quotes that I keep on my desk, like there's so much of that going into it is knowing that that is not my identity.
Yeah.
My success in this situation is not my identity. Therefore, imposter syndrome becomes a snowball instead of an avalanche.
Right. And
connection and community helps keep that at bay, helps me see the blind spots, and then helps me be able to do more of that growth mindset.
Yeah.
Of take things in the direction that I want them to be and what God called us to be.
Right. And the more that we do that, the more that resonates, and we're walking out what he called us to be.
Yeah.
Imperfectly and in beautiful ways, because that's what he wants. Yeah. That's our part of the responsibility, is to show up.
So, yeah. So taking it back really, really practical, because we brought beliefs, we brought all these things into play. So I'm trying to we're circling the drain.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that's the right phrase.
Alrighty.
We're closing in on, I think, a landing spot for this, which is bringing belief into this. Like, how do you deal with the belief in order to get to that spot? And I think it is a spot of doing some real heart work to get to and say, what is the belief under the belief? And connection, community is necessary for that, to say, what about this made this so impactful? And then what we can do with that is we can pause at that and say, is that belief true?
Right.
Is that belief accurate? Is it in line with biblical standards? Is it in line with what God has called me to be? Is it helping me achieve the goals that I want to set out?
Yeah.
And then we can start to work and shape and transform that in connection, in community, with friends, with God, in prayer, trying things, experimenting with things. I think that's how all the stuff comes to play, to transition those beliefs into what God has called us to be and get over the imposter syndrome.
What you just described is salvation, working itself out, right? Yeah. Working our salvation out.
Yeah.
And because the core beliefs that we have that are simply not true, not what God says about us, where did those come from? Yeah. Right? This is what was lost in the fall, and this is what Jesus came to save.
Yeah.
Right?
We can't do it by ourselves.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I would say there's three things, and this is what we're passionate about. The Human Project, we're passionate about connection in a sense, like with myself. If I can't hear my own thoughts, if I can't address what's going on, if I can't realize that I'm dealing with imposter syndrome, this breaks down. But if I do, there's an opportunity here. If I can see some of the beliefs, and then in community, that's where we can actually get to those deeper spots, because people outside of our heads can see things we can't, and can help us and question and challenge and support us. And then connection with God, because when you get down to it, the core of this is false belief.
Yeah.
And we're not going to address that just by shoving a different statement down at it.
Right.
Let's just kind of paint over top of that belief with a new one, even if it's biblical. It is God who will do the heart surgery with us in community. So those three elements are the thing that are essential to address the things that are really that deep inside of us.
Yeah. Wow. I did not expect us to go here when we brought up imposter syndrome.
Didn't either.
But man, it goes to show how deeply held our beliefs can be.
Yeah.
And that we cannot solve it with the means that got us into the problem that we're in.
Yeah. That's true. We're going to dig ourselves deeper instead.
Yeah. So partner with God.
In community.
Sweet. That's awesome. There you go. Thanks for exploring that with me, my friend.
Good topic.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Hey folks, thanks for tuning in today. Behind the mics, you've got myself, Chris Conlin, and Mark Wavle, and our lead editor is Derek Donley. We are a crowdfunded nonprofit. Most of what we do is free because of your generous support. Thank you for joining us in our mission to bring 1 million lives closer to fullness in God's design. To support us financially or to learn more, visit humanproject.us. We'll see you next episode.